Tom, if you can hear me, this is Butch. If you have started, we are not getting audio.
I am so sorry. I was off and then I was back on, and I just talked quite a bit with without introducing you guys. So let me start over. Our presenters, and I apologize to the audience here today, is David Wyatt from LP3. He's the CTO and Principal Information Officer there, and Butch Zackrell, are the VP of Cyber and Intelligence Analytics, who will lead a good portion of this presentation. For those of you who have joined us, we've typically see in these sessions that we get a variety of interested parties. Some of those are companies that are considering getting into the government and perhaps the DoD contracting arena and want to make sure that they understand better what some of those requirements may be to participate in these types of contracts. Many of you are already very familiar with the NIST 800 171 requirements that are out there, and what you may need to do to meet the new requirements that will be coming with CMMC, and Butch is going to spend time on that. And then, of course, we are a software provider that helps companies do this process a little bit more efficiently. We provide software that companies like LP3, a partner of ours, use to make that process that more efficient. But Butch, I was going to ask, for those that may not be familiar, can you explain a little bit about what a registered provider organization is and does, and how it fits into the whole CMMC ecosystem?
Sure. A RPO is an accredited organization by the Cyber Accreditation Body to be able to provide assessment consulting services for those organizations seeking CMMC compliance. And that could be for CMMC level 1, CMMC level 2 self-assessed, CMMC level 2 audited, and then, of course, the higher level of CMMC level 3. So basically, we assist you in becoming CMMC compliant. And for CMMC level 2 audit, CMMC audit ready. Does that help, Tom?
Very much, very much. And I think it's particularly for those that are maybe trying to get into this process or are wanting to make sure, obviously, that they are doing the right things to meet these requirements. Having kind of the seal of someone who's been deemed an authority to some degree to do that helps a lot. And a lot of those organizations need that. So thanks for that explanation. And while we go through that, maybe now you can provide a little bit of an overview. We're going to talk a little bit about the process itself, kind of where they are with this right now. This approval has been going on for close to 4 to 5 years, and it looks like we're almost here at the finish line. What the current status for organizations seeking compliance, what they'll need to do. Obviously, you're going to touch on some of the key components of what will be the assessment if and when you have to go through a third-party assessment. And then we'll provide a little bit of an overview on some tools that can be used, or folks like LP3 and their customers are using through SureShield to help in that ongoing process. And then we will take one brief poll question just to get an understanding where folks who are participating here today are at in this process. And then we'll open it up to questions at the end of the session. And for those who are interested in learning more or getting a no obligation consultation review, or at least talk with the LP3 folks, we'll make that offer to you as well. So Butch, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide and turn
Okay.
it over to you.
Okay, so CMMC is coming. Obviously, it has been moving at the speed of government, but it has come through many of the hurdles in order to become a statute, basically the law of the land for the defense industry based. The proposed rule is expected to be approved and beginning to roll out in the fourth quarter of 2025. The projected date right now is October 15th. Anybody want to make bets on that? Now, under these proposed rules, it will require contractors to have a current CMMC assessment at the time of award and maintain that assessment for the duration of the contract. Without a required assessment, the contractors who fail to maintain it, the contract will be subject to termination. So you must have your CMMC in place and you must maintain it throughout the life of the contract. Now, so subcontractor compliance, the prime contractors will be responsible to ensure that their subcontractors are also CMMC compliance. So they will have to attest with the signature of an officer of the company that yes, their subcontractors are compliant. Here's something that's relatively new, that contracts, this will be applicable to contracts below the simplified acquisition threshold, which is currently $250,000. The only exceptions are those contracts solely for the purchase of commercial off-the-shelf items that are under $10,000 micro purchase threshold. Everybody else must be CMMC compliant. Now, through the life of the contract, contractors will also have to notify the contracting officer within 72 hours if there is a change in their CMMC certification status. So if you are making any changes to your network configuration, if you move to another service provider, okay, if you're absorbed into another company, you must notify the contracting officer within 72 hours. International companies and systems will be held to the same standards as US-based companies. So the Cyber AB is actually opening up accreditation to foreign entities, especially Canada, Europe, and those with reciprocal security agreements with the United States. Here's the interesting part. Implementation timing. We know that the DoD is going to have a phased-in approach, but what we don't know is what programs, contract, task orders will be rolled out in the initial fiscal year 2025 and then into fiscal year 2026. Now, we have seen a dramatic increase in the reference of CMMC in RFPs, RFIs, and RFQs. The last number we had was 600. We are now seeing 1,500 references to CMMC in current solicitations. So it is coming, okay? Also, false claims. The DoD is going to be very rigorous on false claims. There was just one recently in the news where a contractor said they were compliant with NIST 800-171. They were not. They were basically disclosed by their own internal staff, and they have been fined by the Department of Defense. So they are going to be watching false claims very, very closely here. Some of the same things, once you're CMMC compliant, you are good for 3 years. Of course, you still have to have your annual assessment and seeing if there's any changes within your status. Any questions on that? And Tom, I'll let you read the question, sir.
Not right now that I'm seeing, Butch.
Okay, very good. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
But just to your point, for anyone that's going to be participating or wants to participate in these uh, types of contracts, with the exception of very few, one way or another, all of you are going to have to meet a certain level of CMMC compliance, whether you're at a level 1, level 2, or level 3, right?
And that's correct. I mean, and what we've heard from many, many of the customers we've done assessments for, it's not going to affect me. I don't carry confidential, unclassified information, right? I don't have to worry about this. When that solicitation comes out, whether it be an RFP, an RFQ, a task order, whatever it may be, that contract, that solicitation will have the level of CMMC that is required. It's not asking you, do you carry it? It's not asking you if it matters to you or not. This is what you're going to need to have, and that must be represented in the DoD's Suppliers Performance Risk System, or SPERS. Okay,
Mhm.
so so it's so be prepared. So this is really kind of a high level. Well, let me back up. So we have CMMC level 1, which you have to apply by 15 of the 110 controls and policies within CMMC. You have CMMC level 2, which you have to comply to all 110 policies and controls with no POAM or plan of action and milestone, but this is self-assessed. So you have companies like LP3 as an RPO that helps you through this process. You're self-assessed. Yes, we have it all. Here's it is as indicated in our system security plan. Now the next level up is the CMMC level 2 third-party audit. This is where a third-party auditor will come in and assess that, yes, you are compliant with CMMC. And this is kind of a high-level view of what that process looks like. So the first thing you will do is actually request an assessment. Now, this is just very simple process. I need to be audited. You go out to a third-party auditor and you request request to be audited. You'll meet with them and establish the rules and the responsibilities, basically what you're going to do, what they are going to do. And this is actually very important, and that is the contractual agreement. What they say they are going to do, what they say on how they're going to do it, make sure it is in the contractual agreement. That contractual agreement is going to be the governing document throughout this process. Now, the next one here, organize and prepare. Now, you see that there's 11 templates, 6 of those mandatory, in order to organize and prepare for this audit. Now, if you have a company, an RPO, come into your organization to assist you with this process, and they basically come in and say, okay, we got this really great spreadsheet that we use. That's going to be a red flag for the organization and prepare phase of the audit, because you want to be able to go directly from a control to the artifact that proves the control has been satisfied, right? Spreadsheets don't do that. So organization and prepare, it is very important to have some type of tool to be able to work you through this process. Okay, now you're ready to, now you go into the ascertain. Are you ready? Are you ready to have this? Are you ready to go through the audit process? Yes or no? If it's a no, you go back, you fix the things the auditor tells you. and then you start going through the actual audit. And the rest is kind of self-explanatory, right? The conducting the audit, the assessment, and then moving forward with the actual results thereof. Tom, next slide.
Sure. And obviously, Butch, I think you're also pointing out that because that process will be somewhat rigorous, you're best to have everything, feel that you have everything in line before you start requesting that review as well, because you don't want a lot of back and forth of them coming back and telling you you're not ready.
That is absolutely correct. And that's where we work with a lot of our clients who want to be CMMC level 2 self-assessed, but they want to be audit ready. And those are two different levels of effort. Okay. So we want to make sure that you're going to be audit ready. And it's very important to have a tool that goes through each one of those 110 controls and policies and aligns them with the body of evidence and artifacts that shows an auditor, yes, you are compliant. And another reason, it's going to save you time and it's going to then save you money. If these auditors are working on a time and material basis and you have a spreadsheet, now you have to go look for documents, artifacts, etc. Time's money. Time is money. So, conducting the assessment. The assessment kickoff meeting, right? This is very important. This is really where you get down to boots on the ground. How is this assessment going to go? Here's how it's going to play out. Here's what you're going to do and when, and this is what they are going to do and when. And again, we're getting right back to that collect and examine the evidence. There's 6 sub-processes within this, right? This is where the most time-consuming and is really where the metal meets the meat in this assessment, because they're going to go through each one of those 110 controls and policies, and you're going to get met or you're going to get not met, right? Now, within a not met, you will have the ability to take those not met and put them on a plan of action and milestone or POAM. You have 180 days to fix that problem. Okay. And then they're going to come back in. They're going to take a look at it. You did it. Great. You're good to go. The next spec is the actual practices and validate. These are your results. Okay. Here's what it looks like. Yes, you've passed. No, you got these items on a POAM. Okay, fine. Take these things, start knocking down that POAM list, and then so you come up with a perfect score. And then you come up with your preliminary recommendations and findings. Interesting enough, all of this information is then going to go in a DoD system called EMAS. And if anybody is familiar with authenticate to operate on a government system or any of the risk management frameworks or any of those, then you'll be very familiar with EMAS. Next slide.
Great. And Butch, I'm going to just
Yeah.
pause here for a second on a couple of things. We're going to take a poll, first of all, to see if kind of where folks and attendees here are in the process, but we have seen a few chats where we've had a few folks that have had some audio issues. And I'm hoping everyone is able to hear now, but just in case you can't, David in the chat has also pointed out that this presentation as well as the recording will be shared with everyone as well. So I apologize. It's hard for us because we can't necessarily unmute the participants right now that if you are having audio issues, um, we'll put in the chat again that all this will be shared with you post-meeting as well.
Okay. And Tom, as you're putting up the survey,
Yep.
I do want people to know that unlike years past, okay, CMMC compliance is not, for most, is not that heavy of a lift. Okay. If you're using platforms like Microsoft Azure, O365, AWS, if you're using tools like QuickBooks, UnaNet, Salesforce, Dell Tech, a lot of these software as a service, right, are already CMMC compliant. And
Mhm.
as David can attest from doing literally a few hundred of these assessments, using Microsoft O365, you're probably about 50 to 60% in compliance today because Microsoft has already met the controls and policies for the CMMC that comes under them, as well as companies like UnaNet, like Salesforce, like Dell Tech. So this is not going to be a heavy lift and is not as scary as some of our peers within the industry may be telling you. Okay. We have gotten people CMMC level 2 self-assessed in 30 to 45 days. Now, of course, they are using mostly managed service providers. They're using software as a service. Like LP3, we're a virtual company. We don't have offices. Okay. So it's not that heavy of a lift to be compliant.
Great. And we do have the poll up. I see folks that are responding to it just to get a sense of whether, as you know, if you are a participant in the programs now, you are required to do an 800-171 assessment. It looks like half the participants that have answered have done so, and about half have not. So if you have not, and you are a participant in this program, you definitely need to get that done, or if you're going to consider being in it, you should have that done. And then a smaller portion of those have not updated it as of this point. So even if you have done one, it's important that you go back and start reviewing and seeing where things may have changed and making sure that that's up to date. And as we'll show you in some tools that we have, how you can make that a little bit more of a simple process. As Butch said, much harder to do if you're using kind of more manual processes for that.
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and close out this poll, Butch, and then let you go, guys, go ahead and continue.
Well, now I'm going to actually turn it over to David Wyatt. David Wyatt and his team actually spearheads the CMMC compliance, the NIST 800-171, ATO, RMF, ISO 27001, SOX 2. So David lives and breathes and loves compliance. So, David?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Butch, for those strong statements about compliance. Hi, folks. Well, welcome to the webinar today. I'm David Wyatt. So as Butch alluded to, I'm the CTO and I run our compliance service management team. And basically, what I like to do when it comes down to these assessments to work with our clients to prepare for CMMC, that's what we're preparing for right now. But I also like to let people know that, right now the law of the land is the NIST 800-171, and that CMMC is going to incorporate all of the 110 controls that are already required in order to they're already required to be addressed from a self-assessment standpoint. So what I like to do is I like to start going down and understanding some of the key systems and key areas that CMMC wants to scope out and wants to, particularly ensure that there is a process, there are policies, and you have procedures in place to suspect or to identify, to detect any type of anomalies or any type of potential risks that might come into a CUI environment, especially because it's going to be directly affecting the government and the government programs. So with that, for the CMMC section 3.3, this is where we spend a lot of our time. So this is the audit and accountability section. And this is where we have 9 controls that specifically address all of your systems that are within your CUI scope for the CMMC certification. And within this audit and accountability domain, what a lot of things typically get missed are log management, log aggregation, setting up logs so that you guys can understand what's happening with your systems, what's normal, what's not. So some of the examples, like you see on the screen here for the 3.1, if you notice, the control says that it needs to extend, right? To what extent is needed. It's not as prescriptive enough to simply say, do we have logs? After all, we all have endpoint logs. So typically this control involves using log ingestion as a task for a system information and event management, so a SIM tool. We call it IDR because it's performing both intrusion and detection while functioning as a SIM. But the concept is the same. You identify all the types of logs and all the type of devices that you have that are physical and virtual. And your goal is to point all of these logs to one ingestion point, which is the SIM. The SIM then parses and makes use of all that data. And then depending on the size of your organization, some of your analysts might take that data and turn it into something relevant so that you guys can start setting up alerts, creating your dashboards and triggers and so on. Another one of the big ones is this 3.3.2. And this right here, this control right here, it's a little more difficult. So most of your logs will show things like, hey, someone logged into the VPN at this time, or someone disconnected from the VPN at that time. You might be able to combine a VPN log with a Windows host log and then be able to say, well, I saw an individual log in at 8 in the morning, and then I saw them leave their log into the workstation, 7:45, whatnot. But that's basically just touch points for when they connected using the VPN. But what activity happened from the point they logged in to the point they logged off? So basically, they could have logged off at the end of the day, but how are you going to validate what they were doing on that network? And a lot of times what will happen is you want to be able to have metrics to show, hey, look, for all my users over here, what's our productivity times? What are the times where we see people working or managing, their daily responsibilities versus, traffic that you can find that is not necessarily related to the work? What are they touching? You've got to be able to answer those questions. And everything that a user does is all logged somewhere. Your challenge is, are you capturing those logs, or are they just being generated and left on some end device? Are you capturing host logs, network logs, user logs? Do you have applications that are in place that help you make use of that data? But in order to make use of that, it has to be identified first. So some of the things that we dive into is, with all the logs and with all our systems, especially if you work in an enterprise environment, or if you have more than 50, employees and users of your IT systems, we know that, from an IT perspective, and especially from a cybersecurity perspective, there can be a lift on, not just setting up what you're capturing and how you can make it usable, but or turn it into usable data, but also who's reviewing this information. And I know that's one of the big challenges that CMMC hopes to address here is, we have a lot of the data, but a lot of times it's not used into something that can be preventable or allow you to be proactive to threats or securities to CUI environments. So one of the big questions for 3.3.3 is, what are you capturing? What are you reviewing? How frequently are you reviewing your logs? How are you documenting the processes you follow? Where is that evidence stored? This is probably the most important control, even though it's the shortest and looks the simplest, but you have to determine all of these in advance. You have to document what your processes are so you can show them to your auditor. The auditor is going to check to see if those processes are actually being followed and if those processes are actually, going to the intended results, which is compliance with this control. And what I encounter when we work on the reviewing the updated event logs is, this one has a large footprint in the CMMC environment. And what I mean by that is meaning that you're going to be required to have policies that address this in detail. They're going to have policies that are going to require you to have date timestamps, log on, log off. Is going to have access controls that are going to be put into this specific control. You're going to have a lot of data prevention that's going to be, and data security that's going to be put around your log systems. And basically, this control right now is saying, hey, look, if you're collecting everything, if you're supporting everything, and you want a good picture of the health of your systems, you have to be looking at that data and set up some processes that enable, the data to go to the right places, to be in front of the right people so that you guys can make the right decisions. Another big part of this too is once you have the right processes in place and once you're reviewing and you're updating your log events, the next one right here, that 3.4, is who's getting alerts in the case of a failure. Now, a lot of us, most organizations tend to overlook or not fully put a lot of effort into ensuring that, this control is satisfied. They set up devices to send logs, but most of the time what happens is, there's a problem in between where the devices stop sending logs and nobody really notices. One of the ways to solve this is oversight is to create, dashboards. For example, if you have 5 firewalls and if you want to see the total amount of traffic per day on those firewalls are producing, you'd set up a dashboard to render that data, and you can look at it like through a bar chart. You're obviously going to have some fluctuations day to day, but let's say that, a 10% fluctuation in traffic is your threshold. If all of a sudden you see a 40% drop in the logs for that day, you don't need to be alerted in any other way. You need to know that one of the firewalls are down. You basically can determine that, or that it's not sending you logs, and then you can take a look at it. You must figure out all of these types of scenarios and have them documented. You also need to decide if you will be putting this into a dashboard or if you're going to have it monitored, but you're going to have a process that's in place that the auditor is going to be able to review to show that it is representing all of these systems in scope for the CMMC audit. And then, of course, we go into correlating your audit records. So a lot of times we have a lot of companies that have a lot of these tools set up, or they might be partially there. They do all the work, but they don't really document. But when it comes down to looking at events, or when you're trying to determine what unusual activity looks like in your network, most organizations don't have a baseline and they don't have metrics to be able to that are documented that are be able to tell you, hey, look, this is unusual activity for a Monday versus, this is normal activity. I mean, it might sound like, a silly question, to ask, what does normal activity or unusual activity look like on your network? But it's something you have to define. That unusual activity on one network could be commonplace on another, depending on your global environment, depending on the country you're in, your region, your culture. Everything is different here. Users work in multiple time zones. Their behavior might be normal, for some, but might be totally different for others. And if you work in multiple environments, you have to know what unusual activity looks like. So this control is pretty critical. If any of these activities is such that you may need to bring on law enforcement, it's crucial that you have ironclad evidence. And if you have qualified, and it helps you determine if you have qualified personnel available to review and analyze in case there's criminal behavior. And this is something that has a lot of implications, because when we get into the False Claims Act, the False Claims Act is going to be the primary teeth in which the CMMC AB is going to use for enforcement. So when you look at something like this, and let's just say you have an incident, if you're on a contract that has CUI data and you are CMMC level 2, let's just say they require CUI or they require CMMC level 2 self-assessed. What'll typically happen in this case is if there is, let's just say, if there's an incident where there is a CUI spillage or just a CUI incident in general, there's obviously an incident response that's going to be triggered to that. So, and part of the requirements is that you have to have a chain of command to notify the government, so that your contracting officer and designated heads of the contract that are on the government side that have to be alerted. Now, once there's an alert, there's obviously going to be an audit, and there's going to be an investigation that's going to take place to see whether or not it was malicious, if it was accidental, going through your incident response procedures to see what the severity is. But during that entire process, the first thing that's going to happen is there's going to need to be a preservation of not just the logs, but you have to be able to show, and you have to be able to prove now that you are practicing, that you have everything documented, that you're actually following them, and that in the event that an audit takes place and you're taking a look at the logs, there's an explanation on how to retrieve the logs and how to basically bring trust into your chain of custody for those laws for the rest of the investigation. So it's very critical that when you're going through the CMMC assessments, that you go into all of your in-scope systems and make sure that all of these have a lot of consideration and a lot of detail put into them, so that you guys can be successful in all your other tools with all your other systems and build your incident responses and really provide, a safe, foundation and a secure foundation to build the rest of the CMMC compliance off of.
David, did you want to touch on these other?
Yeah, absolutely. So for that 3.6, when you're providing those audit reduction and report generations, consider the reporting that's available to you. Each product out of the box has some canned solution, but not all those canned solutions can meet your needs. Most of them, are going to require some type of customization. Maybe you need to send some user logs to another application that lets you customize the data a little more. And something that I typically use as an example is if you have a lot of ingestion of logs, and you need to start, parsing through the logs to what's relevant or maybe to what's just required for you to monitor. A lot of times you can have some like Apache NiFi sitting in the middle that, reviews all the logs where they're at, parses all the information, and is able to spit it back out in more concise, consolidated records that you're then able to ingest into your SIEM to make information, or to make data turn into information a little easier. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to make sure that your reports in the process are in line with the compliance certification that you're adhering to. You may be doing audit log collection and reporting and reviews, but with these activities, are they going to meet the CMMC certification requirement? Or is it something that you have in place that just meets industry best practice? What are you doing with the data presented in your reports? If you hold every after-action meeting that identifies identity failures, how many times do you actually implement fixes versus just record them as action items or POAM items? If the same recommendations keep popping up after each of your action meetings, but they're never really implemented, this doesn't show maturity from a certification perspective. You may have well-documented security programs, but what's important is that your level of maturity and your improvements match up with that maturity. For the 3.3.7, so this control is another one that organizations often overlook because organizations use various network time synchronization protocols. You may have allowed Windows to do your time synchronization itself, for example. You may have your own NTP server. You might be putting things out to to an NTP server that's on the internet. Now imagine if you're trying to capture logs from hundreds of devices, but your users and their timestamps aren't synchronized. It will be very difficult to figure out who did what and in what order. In a lot of cases, this is not really a big issue because users are unable to move around and do things, in under a second. So if timestamps are off by a second or two, this is not really a big issue. But ideally, you want everything to synchronize. Time synchronization has a major impact on operations outside of just security. So you should do some kind of time synchronization for everything outside of security, and then offer that kind of integrity and accuracy that you want to look for in an investigation. So for the 3.3.8, how do you protect your audit information, your audit logs, and auditing tools from unauthorized access? Your IT staff may wear multiple hats, but this is one of those times where separation of duties and least privilege come into play. You don't want those individuals who audit your environment to also be the ones doing the work. Otherwise, it's easy for someone to enter an environment, modify the tools or the logs, cover their tracks so you don't see what's been going on. A good example of this is your vulnerability remediation program. You don't want the same folks who do the scanning to also do the patching and to also do the remediation. If they get busy, something happens, they don't, necessarily want to look bad. What's to stop them from modifying results? How do you make sure admins can't erase logs? And even in the best case scenario, hitting that delete button could be innocent, but it still has an impact. How are you protecting those logs at rest? And then 3.3.9. So this one goes into limiting, the management limit management of your audit logging functionalities. How do you limit access to files from a permissions perspective? How do you make sure no one with access modifies the logs? And then how do you audit your users' access over time? Auditing users over time is probably the most difficult task because it is mostly the most time consuming. It creates a ton of overhead that, most organizations might not be, capable of managing. Reports get sent, but no one's there to review them. This works until you get audited. You tell the auditor you have a process, but then the auditor asks, well, what have you done with all the data? How are you using the data? The biggest thing to remember here is that what you do with your data is probably defined by the scope of your audit. So the more you can do to reduce the scope, in this case, the easier your job will be. And those are just some basic breakdowns for your audit and accountabilities under the sections 3.3.
And that's just one section, as you point out as well, right?
That's just one section.
Right. But I think one of the things you're pointing out is just it's not as much as saying that you're doing something, it's actually demonstrating, having the supporting evidence behind it, and showing that, there's action that's being taken with it as well. Meaning, you said something to the effect of, it's fine to do a vulnerability scan, but if you're not showing that you're actually taking actions to do regular remediation and improvement, then you essentially really aren't meeting that requirement. So it's why, again, while this process is important to get involved in now, it's not a static process, meaning it should be a continuous kind of automation. You talk about compliance automation built into that gives you all the things that you would need to document actions, provide the backup, artifacts that you need, and then of course also be able to generate the output that various entities, whether it be a C3PAO or the government itself, are looking for. Right, David?
Absolutely. And I think one of the big things to kind of be aware of is that, you know, when you go through an audit, it's not just auditing policies, but you're going to be audited on your processes as well. So there's going to be an immense amount of documentation and level of granularity that's going to have to explain and describe how all of these controls individually meet each of your systems and scope.
Excellent. And in the interest of time, I know we're only got about another 10 minutes. I'm just going to touch on briefly, some tools that can be leveraged and used in this process. Again, I've hopefully folks are hearing the depth of knowledge that folks like people from LP3 have and can really assist you in making sure that you meet these requirements in the most, I would say, cost effective and really understanding how to do this it's not as difficult as Butch said as it may appear to be if you put the right things in place. So I'm only going to give kind of a brief overview on technology side, how companies are leveraging some technology we have to maintain that compliance. So in this case, we've got a customer that is looking at meeting the NIST 800-171 or CMMC level 2 requirements. And in the solution, it provides not only information on the practices. There was a question that was asked in the chat in terms of whether we provide the subdomains or the objectives around a control, because controls aren't just one. There's actually objectives that you need to meet in order to meet those controls or to mark them compliant. And so we provide tools that help make sure that you're meeting those sub-objectives. There's policies and procedures that can be availed of. Folks are either bringing them into our system or they're updating and modifying those and validating that they actually have an established policy in place. Those policies are tied to the controls so that when you're doing a review or an assessment, you can actually look at things both at what I would call the domain level. You can also look at it at the policy level. I may have a particular policy. So in the example of access controls, there's actually 22 different controls that relate to that access control policy, or there's 22 different controls that relate to that policy. And you can look at it from that perspective and take action in terms of what might need to be done. There are what we call evidence worksheets. So we've automated some of those processes on a regular basis, like David was mentioning, where we can look at, for instance, do all the machines have proper malware on them? Rather than you having to go out and document that, we can pull that data in and have it as be supporting evidence that you're meeting that particular requirement. And if you aren't, you can document tasks and that need to be done in order to help address those from a plan of action and milestone perspective. Keeping in mind that with the new CMMC coming out, there will be limitations on what can even go on a POEM. There's going to be a certain number of controls that you're going to have in place, and we'll never be able to put on a plan of action with that. So just briefly, if I were to look at a particular control, I can basically, if I were to look at these, it would give me information on what's required in that control, guidance on how to meet that control, the answers to that particular control. And then I think there were some questions about, do you have the sub objectives? So we help provide some what I would call guardrails to make sure that no one's answering anything as compliant without having the supporting backup documentation to do so. And so if you're going to mark something compliant, you're going to have the proper information to validate that and avoid issues like David pointed out in terms of something like a false claim. Lastly, they use it from the perspective also of being able to run regular reports that they can generate both from just a basic compliance standpoint and or generating all the required government documentation today, which would include a system security plan, a plan of action and milestone report that will pull data on items from there and generate that. And then the current, what they call assessment score, where it will generate dynamically that score. And we would expect that that score will still be in place, particularly for those who might meet the requirement of being a level 2, but don't have to do C3PAO audit. There is some indication that there may be some that don't have to go through that process. So that's how LP3 leverages technology like this to help in that. But obviously, the insight and expertise that they generate, that they provide, helps make sure that you meet these requirements. So with that, Butch, I'm going to go ahead and take on any other questions. David, there were a couple of questions that were asked in the chat. If you might be able to respond to those within there. Sorry, let me bring back the PowerPoint presentation. If you could answer those, and then if there's other questions for folks, if you could go in and please go to the Q&A and ask those. If you are interested in consulting with folks from LP3, please, I'm going to pull up a quick poll on that as well. And if you're interested, it's a no obligation consultation if you need help in trying to figure out how to wrap your arms around this process. A note on the follow-up, any of you that do indicate that you would like to have a consultation with them, you'll have a representative from LP3 who will follow up with you and schedule that time. All of you will receive this presentation as well as recording of it, and apologize for any audio issues that we may have had. For those of you participating in my lack of forgetting to get off the mute, I apologize for that and hope that didn't delay things too much. But I do see, Butch, there were several folks that are expressing interest in a consultation.
Sure. And Tom, I do want to reiterate how important it is to have a tool like this. And sure, CMMC, you have to be compliant in order to do business with the Department of Defense. But also, when it comes to your cyber insurance, a lot of the questions on those questionnaires from those insurance companies, you can actually now answer in the affirmative, and again, show that body of evidence and those artifacts. Well, yes, you do these things, and we have actually seen lower cyber insurance rates. We also tell our customers, use this as a differentiator, not only in your federal business, but also in your commercial business. This is a literally military grade baseline for cybersecurity. So you should be getting all of the mileage out of this other than just compliance.
Excellent. Well, I know we're a little bit limited on time and don't want to go past our allotted time. If folks have any other questions in the Q&A, I know we've gotten some that have come through the chat. If there are other questions that you have, please direct them to the Q&A portion of this. Again, Butch, your best estimates on when we would start seeing these in contracts that are coming forward. I think you said in solicitations that perhaps start to come out next year.
Well, actually, we are seeing them now. We are seeing them now. So especially on those RFPs that are not due for another 4 or 6 months or so. As I said, when I say 1,500 mentions, that also includes where, yes, we want to see CMMC level 2 by the time this is awarded. And of course, it's going to be awarded in the first quarter, FY25, calendar fourth quarter, first, second quarter of the next calendar year. We actually had one that had to be CMMC level 2 audited and did CAC simultaneously.
Hmm.
And I can tell you, when we walked into there, their existing RPO was using spreadsheets, and it was sporty, let's say.
Mhm.
We went in and started using, literally took everything they put in spreadsheets, put it into SureShield and streamlined the process and got them to audit ready. David, was it 45 days?
49 days.
49 days. And this was no small company. Now, of course, David and his team, they don't have lives, right? So that was a good thing right there. And again, the lift for most companies, especially small to medium-sized businesses, should not be that great. NIST 800-171 has been in place since 2017, right? So a system security plan and a plan of action and milestone, your SSP and POAM was all that you needed. We're simply going to take that, build off of that, and do the reciprocity of already implemented controls within your existing cloud provider or your existing software as a service.
Great. Well, we're at the end of the hour. We appreciate everyone participating. You will, if you have requested a follow-up from folks from LP3, they will be reaching out to you shortly. Again, and we'll continue to keep you apprised of things going on at any time. If you're interested, please, reach out to SureShield or LP3, and we will be happy and hope to service you and make sure that you are ready to meet these requirements to maintain those contracts or get new ones. So thanks again, everyone. Butch, David, for your time and presentation, and we thank you for attending.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.